Welcome into the channel, everyone, and Merry Christmas. I know it's the day of and you may not have time to get a last minute Christmas present, but today I'm going to teach you how to make your very own welder's bracelet. Now, I've been making these for about 6 or 7 years at this point, and I've made a lot of them. These things have been made for freaking decades by welders that are typically TIG welding, somewhere where exotic metals or stainless steel wires, those different types of filler metals are being used, whether it's in a refinery, power plant, or maybe a fab shop. They get some downtime and they twist up some wire and they make themselves a little cuff bracelet. Today, the first thing we're going to go over are the things that you need for the actual build. We'll need something to measure with. We're going to need the wire we're going to use, and we're going to get into some more details on each one of these steps as we go throughout this video. The other big thing that I always use is a vise. Now, I've seen people use less, just use little vice grips, some finger clamps in order to do the whole entire bracelet. This thing is my workstation throughout the entire process. I need a vise in order to make one. If I don't have one, I don't even bother making it. The other thing I want to have is a big pair of cutters because we're going to cut through some thicker wires. And then we want a nice little hammer here. A couple extra pairs of pliers because we are going to be getting this bracelet hot in order to do some shaping that I like to do. This is an optional step. I've seen some welders not do this at all. And then we're going to use some abrasives to do some sanding, cleaning, and then move on to the polishing after we do some shaping. So I'm going to have some of these flap wheels. If you go trying to shop for them, they're called flap wheels. We're going to be using different grits to use on the end of this die grinder, and then use this bench grinder with some cotton wheels to do some polishing. Absolutely 100% also need a welding machine. We're going to get into all these things as we get to each step. The first thing we got to do is talk about twisting some wire up. Oh yeah, I also forgot to mention you're going to need a drill. I got a pretty powerful one. You don't need a big powerful one. It comes down to the wire types that you're using. The thinner rod that you're using is going to be harder to weld, and the thicker rod you use or wire you use is going to be harder to work with. It's going to be harder to bend. It's going to be harder to take on and off. It's going to be just thicker. I don't like making them very wide. So I'm going to go with some 3/32 wire today for the inside loops and some 16th wire for the outside loops. And also depends on the design you're going to do. We can go ahead and take this filler metal. I'm going to take each one of these 16th inch wires. I like to go ahead and clip off the numbers. That little flat spot typically will crack or break first, and I don't want to do that. I go ahead and fold that sucker in half. Just line up the ends, fold it in half, and then we can pinch it into the vise. Again, the vise being something very critical that we need. We're going to put this one in forward. So we're going to go ahead and twist. Get that wire chucked up. You gotta pull. If you don't pull, it's gonna get crumpled up and get in a bind. So make sure you put some tension on it. And this is where you get to kind of style and design your bracelet. We can go for a really loose twist, or we can go for like a medium or tighter and tighter and tighter. For this one, I'm gonna tighten it until it breaks. I just twist it till it breaks. That way when I do this other side, I can have the same twist. Just for symmetry reasons, the biggest difference is we're going to put the drill in reverse. People have asked me, well, you just can flip the wire the other way. It doesn't work like that. You put the drill in reverse, and then we're going to twist it till it snaps. So that we get this nice pattern that are opposites of each other. They start rolling in to one another. Now, if you don't want them and you want them to roll with each other, then keep everything the one direction. But these are going to be our outside pieces, and then we're going to twist up our inside pieces. Now I want this to be a mesh of this silicon bronze and this inconel that I have. The inconel is just something close that I have to stainless. Don't use carbon steel. I don't recommend any of that. 308 is plenty fine. You can use 316. You can use any grade of stainless steel for that matter. And then if you use any silicon bronze or maybe some copper, you might have to use some sort of wax to prevent some of the green that you're going to get on your wrist. For this, I only have these 2 pieces of 3/32 wire, so I'm going to end up actually cutting them in half. You can get a lot of bracelets, probably 3 or 4 out of one full rod of twists. Twisting your wire can be kind of trial and error. There's plenty of times, as you saw this inconel one, that popped a lot quicker. I found if I'm able to use a full length of rod, I can usually twist it a lot more than if I have a shorter one. Same as different grades of stainless. It's not that complicated. It's just a bracelet. As far as length goes, 6 inches is plenty. That's usually what a standard that I usually hold is about 6 inches. If I know I'm making it for someone who's got a little bit bigger wrist, I might try, 6 1/4, 6 1/2, up to about 7. This one's for my editor. He's got wrists about my size, but I have little wrists. I'm gonna give him about 6 1/4. Go ahead and cut that first one. depending on the wire you get, sometimes cracks a little sooner. I've used actually the same kind of stainless, 308 and 308, and 2 different brands of wire, and one snapped and one didn't. When you're selecting your wire, maybe buy some in little amounts first. Again, you can make a lot of bracelets out of just a couple pieces of wire. We're only going to be able to get one out of what we twisted today. And we cut everything to the length to make them all about the same. Again, about is all we need. We're going to do some welding on this. We're going to do some hammering. It might get a little bit longer. This is plenty good, but that's the design that we're looking at making today. Okay, so now we move on to the welding portion. As far as a machine goes, I recommend anything that has a high frequency TIG setup with a foot pedal. We're going to be welding at pretty low amperages. We want to make sure that we don't burn through that bracelet. If we burn through it, we pretty much scrap the whole thing. We made it ugly. We only try to put tacks on the back side, and those side wires are only a 1/16 of an inch twisted together, so it's pretty thin. This Lincoln Sprinter 180 SI, even though it does have the full 200 amps, we don't want to use hardly any of that. We're going to go down to about 35 amps. That's pretty hot when it comes to that little wire. Now, if you're starting to use some 332, you could get away with a little bit more amperage, but you could still just pretty much set it here and be fine with it. See, we got a blinking pulse set up. I don't actually want to use the pulse on this machine. It does have quite a bit. However, we are going to use a high frequency start with a foot pedal. I have seen people use a scratch start setup. I have seen people use lift arc. It's not a problem, as long as you don't bleed through the bracelet. If we bleed through it, in my eyes, some people might say it adds character. To me, it's a piece of trash at this point. That's going to be the hardest part about this welding process, is not bleeding through. All right, so the machine is set. We've got our argon on. Normally I'd run like a series 9 torch, like a really small torch, even with the flex lock. But I've got the TIG pack that comes with the machine, the Sprinter. It's this Lincoln torch. It's actually got a super long cable, a little tiny handle on it, kind of like that. I've got a stubby jumbo on here. I could weld pipe with this thing. I could weld a bracelet with this thing. We've got an 1/8 inch tungsten sharpened to a nice tip. We're going to start by putting together the 2 332 wires. This is going to be the inconel and the silicon bronze. You can stack them right next to each other, but that leaves that little gap. I like to slide them a little bit and make sure that they're as tight together as possible. I like that staggered look. Just going to fuse the 2 ends. Maybe roll it around, just make sure it snaps together, back off that foot pedal. All we're trying to do is fuse together these 2 ends. After I got that done, I'm going to go ahead and clamp it in my vise and work my way down. So now we go to clamp this sucker in the vise. The vise is key to keep everything nice and together, keep things from falling out and dropping out. We just want to make sure we get everything to the very edge of those jaws. You see how it wants to roll out of it every once in a while? We want to make sure it's nice and secure in there. If there's any loose spots and we go to welding on it, that wire could just boop, fall right out. I want it to be nice and tight. And then I'm going to feel about where the tightness wears off in my jaws, which is about back in here. I'll tack here, and I'm only tacking the inconel to itself. I'm not even worried about the bronze, but I'm going to go ahead and make a tack with some 045 stainless steel. This is really thin wire, smaller than even the stainless, and I'm going to tack every one of those loops, every single one. If you don't tack every one of those loops, then you're going to find out that you're going to have a weak spot, or when you go to bend it, it's going to kink in those spots without a tack. So make sure we're tacking consistently all the way down. We're going to start back here, put a tack, work our way down. So what I'm doing here is I'm just easing into that foot pedal. I got an auto dark helmet on, got this 3350 Viking from Lincoln, and it picks up this little arc really well. Some auto dark hoods are going to flash on you at this low of amperage. Just be aware of that. But I'm taking my foot pedal and I'm just easing into it. I want to have my filler metal, my little wire there, before I strike the arc so that it kind of balls up a little bit, and then I take that little ball and I drop it in that little weld joint between the 2 pieces of inconel. Just move the bracelet down in our vise, and we keep going. One other tip is I'll give you is don't feed from the side, feed linear with the bracelet, I suppose. And again, we're just putting this little tack on in between these 2 inconel twists, giving more heat with that foot pedal until I see that tack sink, and then I'm off of it immediately, because I don't want that tack to burn through. Now this isn't as big of a deal compared to this little 16th that we're going to put onto it next. We're going to take our already welded pieces and we're just going to do what we did with those 2 at the beginning. Doesn't matter what side we put this little wire on, we're just going to set it up nice and tight against the other one and fuse the ends together. It's easier said than done. Might have to roll the bracelet around to get the puddle to snap together, and I usually will run it all the way across to make sure they're all three fused. Once we got that, we do the exact same thing. Make sure you tack it on the same side. If you put one tack on the other side, you've done ruined it. Don't ask me how I know. Where we see that tack, we're gonna follow that tack down, because sometimes the coloration starts to look the same. Put a little tack. Even at 35 amps, you can still get carried away with that little wire. Sometimes they get a little bit out of alignment, so I just kind of pull and bend on them until they're all in a straight line again. And it's okay if everything's not perfectly in alignment. It is preferred, but we're gonna fix that with a little trick that I'll show you later. Put the last piece on. The best advice I could give you when you're doing these is keeping everything really close and together. If you can tell, again, I'm easing into that foot pedal and balling up a little bit of this 045 wire until there's a ball where I want that metal, and then I apply the heat with the foot pedal. I do believe this is the cleanest way that you can accomplish these tacks. And it's not gonna happen on the first one. Most likely you're gonna ruin a few, because you probably suck at it, just as you suck at everything for the first time. Alright, so we've got our band basically built. It is a little bit wonky, but again, I've got a little trick for that later on. I don't pay attention to that because we'll fix it. The next thing we got to do is we got to fill in the ends. If you want a nice, smooth, clean filled in into the bracelet, that's the only trick. Is it now we just fill in all the nooks and crannies full of metal, and then we have a nice end to our bracelet. So we can go turn our machine up a little bit. This is going to help speed up the process. I recommend going no higher than maybe 50. You still got full control over your foot pedal, and you can also opt to go for some of that 1/16 inch wire now. If it bleeds through, it's going to bleed through. It doesn't weld great on the other side, but again, it doesn't matter because it's just a bracelet. All we're going to do now is come back maybe half an inch, maybe 3/4 of an inch, cut a line across with the arc, and then just fill in all that stuff. You can fill as much back as you want. Again, we're looking to fill in any cracks. I've got full control, manipulation over that foot pedal. The sides where this twisted wire is on the sides of the bracelet are going to give us some trouble. We're going to just make sure that this whole end is just a nice wad of metal, because we are going to do a little bit of heating and hammering and do a little bit of sanding and polishing, so you can fix a lot of the ugly. Let's do the other side. You can weld to the silicon bronze. It'll weld just fine. Copper is a little bit different, a little trickier if you want to incorporate some copper. But you can even weld this stainless or whatever, braze it, whatever you want to call it. You can still fuse to that silicon bronze really easily. That's one reason why I would prefer to use it over copper, but you won't get that copper color with bronze. Maybe even using the arc to round off the end a little bit, give it that end of a bracelet look. Big thing is I'm looking for any voids or cracks. Once those two sides are done, we'll just flip it over to the side with all the tacks. And now we have some seriously sugared and oxide stainless. It's just a bracelet. The sucker is hot. Now that's going to be it for the welding. We've got all the metal where we need it. We've got the ends filled in. They're kind of misshapen and lumpy, and while the bracelet has no bleed through, we still have a lot of uneven edges. All I'm going to do is give it a little bit of love with some oxyacetylene. I'm going to try to hammer in the edges and the flatness of the edges, and then we're going to heat up the whole thing and tighten everything up. Main reason why I like heating things up, one, it's actually how I was taught, but I like to sit on its side to tighten up any gaps and sitting it flat to just make sure it's nice and flat. I don't grind anything away as far as the tacks. I try to keep all that metal there. I don't want to thin anything up either. You could use a propane torch just the same. The bigger the bracelet, the more heat you're going to need. We're going to start by just getting these ends nice and red. You don't want to get them molten because then they're going to get mushy. I'm just going to use this vise. Now you're going to notice some cracking, and that's because of that silicon bronze in there. You'll have that a lot more with copper. I'm gonna need to come back with that welding machine and smooth it up. Luckily the welder's still all plugged up and in, and we're just gonna fuse weld all these cracks back in. Looks like I've kind of misshapen the end more than I'd like. It's all lopsided. And if I'm gonna grind it, I need to make sure I got metal where I need it. Sometimes it be like that. Back to business. I just went ahead and took an angle grinder to the ends and a flap disc and Scotch-Brite wheel, and that ended up cleaning up. And you might think to yourself, well, Austin, that seemed like the best way to do it in the first place. Well, go make your own video. No, it definitely is. If that's the option you want to go with, you should. The only reason why I wanted to do the torch first was for the fact that we got to line all this other stuff out. Kind of killing two birds with one stone if I can accomplish it. Still want to get this all nice and warm, and I don't hammer on things while they are cold. You'll cold work it, you'll harden the material, and then when you start working on it, then you'll notice that these little stainless wires will typically break. And I'm sure that silicon bronze will do the same. I don't want to see that silicon bronze get too shiny. If I see it start to get really reflective, then it's just about to flop and fall out. All I'm trying to do is just line things out. Try to put nice, even, smooth hammer marks, and we'll flip it over, and all those heavy tacks that we had, flatten and mush those in, starting to line out. Now I'm looking at my hammer marks to make sure each individual loop has been hit, flattened the same. Then I'm hitting it on the opposite side to straighten it out. I need to flip it over and get some of this end. It didn't get any love. You should be able to do this in one heat cycle. I'm gonna go for the sides. If I can tighten up that band a little. The main thing is we're straight in both directions. We don't have any kinks in it, because next we're gonna run it through another heat cycle and we gotta bend it. Now, bending a band can make or break one of these things. I've bent them wrong and I've tried to fix them. If they don't have it right in the center, or they've got a little wonky arm on it, maybe you'll see if we don't do this right, but we're gonna try to get it right on the first time. I'm using a piece of 2-inch stainless steel. You can use smaller. I found that 2-inch works the best to get the round that I need. And then we're gonna take these 2 pairs of pliers. That's where these are gonna come in handy. We're gonna take this, we're gonna get it nice and hot. We're gonna make sure our tack side is down so that we get a nice pretty side on the bracelet. And then we're gonna find center, and we're just gonna push it down. And then we're gonna take our hammer and we're gonna hammer it around this piece of pipe. This is all gonna happen really quick. And if you let it cool off too quick, then it won't end up the way you want it, and you'll have to run it through the heat again. Once we get it around the pipe all the way and it's got the nice pipe shape, we're going to take these 2 pliers and look at it, kind of right at it, and then we're going to give it that little bit of a oval shape there at the end. This is all going to happen really quickly, so stay with me. You're going to get this thing nice and orange. We don't want it to be like glowing, but that's why there's a lot of movement in my torch, because if I put too much heat in one spot, we're kind of toast. And I'm going to take our 2 pairs of pliers. You can already see this sucker cooling off real quick. We're going to try to eyeball center, push it around, and then we're going to take our hammer, hammer that end around, grab the other end here. Ran out of time here to get that proper shape. Could probably take these pliers and get it close. Got that right. Oh, I'm just gonna let these 2 pieces touch, kind of curl it in, open it back up. Even though that bracelet is hot, everything that you're working on, like the vise and the piece of pipe as you're trying to bend it, is sucking a lot of that heat out. I like to try to get everything done in one cycle. It looks like we've got a decent shape to our bracelet. It's pretty symmetrical, pretty even. It looks like it's pretty centered. Next thing we're gonna move into is sanding and polishing. I'm not gonna harp on this too much. It's mostly just gonna be watch it as I go. You can start off with like an 80 grit. Now I usually use an 80 grit flap wheel in order to get all of the schmutz off, or if it has some deep heavy scratches. But if like this one isn't too marred up, I'm gonna use a 120 grit. And the way I explain it is, if you need a lot of grinding and shaping, do the grinding with the 80, and then you're gonna need to use the steps to get those scratches out. In order to not have those heavier scratches from the 80, I'm gonna jump straight to the 120 and then to a 180 in order to really get things nice and smooth, and then I can come over here to the polishing bench grinder where I've got two cotton wheels, one coarse and one really soft. This die grinder and that bench grinder have made and polished hundreds of these things. It's my least favorite part about the process because it gets so messy, but it's also the most satisfying part because you start to see a really nice product. The other bit of advice I'll give you is as you're using a vise, we always want to see a backward C in the vise as we go to sand and polish this thing. If you start to move it around in the vise, you know, you want to do the top, you can get the ends in there. You want to do the bottom, you can kind of leave it up like this. But if you ever put it in a normal C, like how you would write a C, with that die grinder, the way it's spinning, can catch an edge and it'll throw that sucker across the shop. Ask me how I know. So I always keep it in a backward C as I'm polishing things so we don't throw it across the shop. We're gonna actually put some rouge, some polishing compound on the coarse wheel so that we can really get some shine. Now check it out. You can spend as much time sanding and polishing these things as you want. Biggest thing is don't grind them too thin. If you grind these wires too thin, then they're going to start snapping really easily as they start wearing out through time and people bending them in and out. But we've got a nice polish on it. Everything looks good. Looks good to me. I hope you really enjoyed this video. These are the ins and outs. This is how I've always made them. It was how I was taught how to make them. If you got a better way, let us know down in the comments how you like making them. But I know it's a little late to make something for Christmas, but hell, I mean, if you made something like this for someone even after Christmas, I'm sure they won't get mad at your belated present. Thanks for watching, everyone. Carried away with that little wire. Sometimes they, whew, spicy. Whoopsies. Hot, 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 hot.